Hey everyone, welcome to Founders 365 with me, Stephen Haggerty. Today I'm joined by the co-founder of Findexable, Mr. Simon Hardie. How are you today, Simon?
Great, thanks, Stephen. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. I'm doing great. How are you doing, man?
Yeah, all good.
All good.
It's a sunny day down here in the Middle East, so all good.
All good indeed. So let's kick this off then with just getting your story, I guess. How did you tell me about the business, what you guys do, and then we can go back in time a little bit more about how you got started.
It's absolutely good. So Findexable is a global map of fintech innovation. We launched middle of last year to build the world's first real-time ranking of fintech ecosystems, and then from there to use that ranking tool to build out a real-time catalogue of fintech innovation. The first rankings report announcement was made in December last year. In July this year, we opened the platform so that the actual index map the real-time map is live, and you can click on it and look at the fintech companies that there are globally. So
Love that. So, what was going on in your world? What were you doing before this that made you go, actually, this is what is needed. This is what's missing in the world, and you thought, I'm gonna be one of the people that makes this happen.
sure. Yeah, it's a good question, and essentially, the team of us came from the world of financial services. We actually came from what used to be called the payments industry in the days before fintech was a thing. Um, we were doing a lot of consultancy work for primarily fast-growing providers of payment technology for financial institutions. That obviously then morphed into fintech, and it wasn't just about payments any longer. But we were advising companies on how to sort of position themselves for a diverse audience of buyers, partners, and possible investors. Part of that work involved quite a lot of research and sort of content creation around the market, and it quickly became it became very clear, particularly as fintech took off as an industry about 5 years ago, that comparing fintech companies, fintech providers, those that were like neobanks, like the Starlings and the Monzos,
Hmm.
those that provide sort of middleware pieces of technology for large institutions, it was very difficult to even just find out how many there are or there were, and impossible to compare them on a like-for-like basis, even at the most fundamental level in terms of the product and who they're trying to sell
Yeah.
to. So we were doing quite a lot of research on the market, and really just came to the conclusion that a benchmarking tool was needed, and then beyond that, an ability to start to benchmark them according to different levels of activity, their performance, and
Hmm.
ideally financial metrics, which is part of the journey that we've not yet started, but that's the kind of route that we're going down.
Very exciting. So, like you said, as there wasn't really anything like this before, you've been going a year. What were some of those early stage challenges for you in just getting this off the ground, getting those first few connections going to make this a reality?
Yeah, and I think it's layered. So the top line challenge is that we started with a ranking of fintech ecosystems themselves, cities and countries, and of course, anybody that ever says that one thing is better than another immediately gets asked, who gave you the right to do that?
Hmm.
How dare you say that this city is better than this country or other city? So that was the first sort of difficult ask. So and from a defence point of view, we therefore have to be very careful about what we're saying, because we're creating a tool which is ultimately at the moment open source and publicly
Hmm.
available, and we have to be transparent as to how the technology that we've got draws those conclusions. So that was sort of the kind of the very big early challenge, and that's a challenge that's running on, and we think we've carried the market with us to some degree. The next big issue for us will be now. Okay, so we have this rankings tool. We have a set of we have quite a good catalogue of fintech companies on the map, approaching around 9,000 fintech companies currently.
Amazing.
How do we now start to get data across as many of them as possible, such that you can then start to build a benchmark. So both of those are, for want of a better word, sometimes headaches. To be quite
It's always interesting how you look at those sort of problems. I'm curious to know how the fintech industry sees you, because from where I sit, it seems like an incredibly useful service. It seems like incredibly valuable. But for the companies themselves, what sort of feedback have you been getting? How closely do you work with them in terms of making sure that all those data points, I guess, are correct, obviously, but also that they're all comfortable with it?
Absolutely. So, our aim is to work as closely with them as we can. We really want this to be so. Just to sort of step back a little bit. There are lots of company databases out there. There's Crunchbase, PageBook, Dealroom, so on and so on. And then there are national ones. There are individual countries and markets of their own. Typically not necessarily focused on fintech, usually focused on multiple segments. So we don't want this to be a tool that just reports on the market as a whole. We really want this to be an advocate for the fintech innovators themselves. So the answer is it's early days. We are working with some fintechs that already that we have in our network. On the whole, the feedback has been immensely positive. But the challenge for us will be, one, to incentivize the fintechs to put more information on there. It can't just be about us gathering the information and putting it on. It's got to be an incentivized, there's got to be an incentive for the fintech companies to have their details. And at the same time, also make sure that we can deliver on our promise, which is to say, okay, we need to be able to prove and work the other way with the investors and the institutions to get them to look at this and start to say, actually, this is a valuable tool, either for us to identify new innovation, or in the case of a bank, for example, to say, actually, we're looking at innovation coming from this part of the world. This map is showing us that maybe we ought to be looking at products and services coming out of this part of the world.
Yeah. And you raise a really good point in terms of the tool itself, because investors and other people, that they have so many tools, and there's just so many tools available to people now when it comes to looking into businesses, looking into industries, looking into potential markets. Where do you see yourself fitting them? Where do you see yourself growing mostly in terms of becoming that go-to tool?
I do think it's around the specificity. I've always been a big believer that the technology moves everything forward. And at some point, it starts. It moves everything forward at sort of roughly the same space. If you think about email, it didn't matter what segment of the world or what industry or even job you had, student, company, etc. It moved everything forward a step. But as technology becomes more sophisticated and the cost of it comes down, of course, at the same time, specificity starts to become where the value is. And my belief really is that if we can be at the crosshairs between technology, using digital tools, machine learning, AI, APIs, and all the rest of the claptrap that goes around, that we talk about, with knowledge around the actual vertical, in our case, financial services. That's the place to be.
That's the sweet spot. I totally agree. You mentioned that obviously you're a year old, which is a incredible achievement in itself, and 9,000 fintech businesses on the platform. How has that been for you? Because that seems like incredible growth to have 9,000 on there. I'm guessing you've been just extremely, let's put it lightly, busy.
Yes, well, there's business is certainly one, but I guess that's nothing new to anybody that's ever tried to run a company, much less.
If you said you weren't busy, I'd be more worried.
Well, exactly. I think we're probably a bit concerned ourselves. So busyness certainly. We've worked with. We have a sort of dedicated partnership business model. So we're constantly looking for partners, which are typically, in our case, sort of member organizations, people that have members of financial institutions and fintech groups. They're also investment promotion agencies. So we've been working with them. We also have then data partners. So Crunchbase was the one that sort of gave us the big uplift at the beginning. with a number of fintech companies, and we have a data sharing agreement with them to put that, to put the fintech companies that are on their database on the map. And then, with the partners, we've been working with with these organisations, these fintech associations and the like, been working with them to help them, or encourage them rather to provide data that we can put on the map in the form of their their lists of members, or the organisations that are in their ecosystem. So that's,
join as many of those dots up as possible.
That's right. Yeah, so cover all
As
bases.
Exactly, as a CEO of an early stage startup, what's one of the most important things for you internally to focus on? Is it other than the business growth, obviously, but in terms of actually creating that, I guess, culture, or creating that dynamic that actually obviously helps the business rather than hinders it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I guess it's probably got more interesting over the last year.
I don't know what you mean.
I think we've all come from, we're an I wouldn't say elderly, but we're certainly an older startup team. We're not in our 20s anymore, sadly.
You mean you're not running around on electric skateboards?
No. Well, I might do that, but we're certainly not young enough to be doing that, possibly. No, I think the key for us is, we're a believer in mission, and our mission, as we see it, is that it's our belief, firstly, that fintech has the opportunity, or it should be, a net contributor to human progress.
Mm-hmm.
But one can't actually say that or measure that if one doesn't know what fintech is in the first place. You can't measure what you can't understand or can't define.
Makes sense.
We don't know what better looks like. So in terms of us sort of building a culture, we're at the early stages. We're a remote company, so that has its own challenges as well. But we've identified what for us are a set of core values that work towards the mission of being able to say, one, we want to be able to measure what better looks like when it comes to financial services, i.e., financial services of the future should be about enabling financial health and well-being. They should also be about enabling entrepreneurship, and they should also about making the world a more sustainable place. And then what are the values that beneath that? What are the values that we need to make that possible? It's really just about a kind of shared view of the world, and trying to encapsulate that within a shared mission.
Yeah, 100%. And when you get that, when you hit that spot, I think that's when you see those teams become even more dynamic, even more creative, and the magic really happens. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned that obviously you got a remote team. Was that remote from day one, or is that something that you obviously had to adopt earlier this year?
No, it was something that we've been from the beginning. My sort of the company that my co-founder came from. I was always she was always based in the UK, just outside London, and I've generally been sort of commuting between London and wherever I've been living at the time. It was Istanbul. Recently, it's Tel Aviv. So it's sort of and then all the people that we work with are us have been. At some point they were based in a sort of physical office location, and are now, of course, working from home. But in principle, we've always been a remote group, and certainly for the foreseeable future that will continue.
Why not? It works. It works. One of the questions that often comes up in most startup communities, I think, if you go to any talk or anything like that has a Q&A session, it is that how do you build the right team? How do you make sure that you're bringing the right people into the business? And especially with, what you're trying to do, I think it's a really interesting space because, like we said, there's people that have done similar things, but not exactly what you're wanting to do. So how did you make sure that you were bringing on that right team? And especially because they are remote, because there's a whole new kettle of fish when people start dealing with remote.
Absolutely, and I think if you've got, you're absolutely right. And I think certainly if you're a younger employee, it's actually pretty challenging to have to be remote from the beginning, because you've never had the experience of working quite like that. We possibly never had the experience of actually working in a company, much less
Yeah, you don't have that person next to you or that person across from you to just shoot those questions to.
Yeah, I mean, I think from our specific experience, it's really been it's partly been a bit of serendipity, and of course the pandemic, I'm afraid to say, has created a wealth of good people on the market, or certainly a wealth of good people that are looking at life differently and looking at different opportunities. And I suspect there'll also be more people coming onto the market anyway over the next few months, certainly in the UK and parts of Europe. So serendipity, certainly. I think it's important to identify, given any company, any product that you want to create or launch, you've got a limit on resources. So you there have to be very explicit on what are the kind of skills that you absolutely need from somebody else that temporarily you can't do yourself. So in our case, it was very much around the sort of the outbound, specifically the outbound marketing. It was around someone to sort of focus and be targeted on sales, and it was on somebody on partnerships, which is a sort of critical. Certainly in this first year, the partnerships have been possibly the most critical thing to drum up because it requires relationships and relationships against a product that didn't exist. So that's one thing. And I think the final thing is, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, but every industry becomes pretty small when you get into it. Even if you're talking about all startups.
That's so true.
So make friends with people, and if whether you're in a startup position now, or you think that maybe down the line you might, or even if it's just about your career, make friends and stay in touch with people. Not just on a cynical, I might need them later basis, but because those people have networks, they have advice, they can guide you on who might be the right person for you. And I think that for the advantage of a small company is you don't need lots of people, but you do need recommendations. You don't necessarily have the resource to use a recruitment agency. You don't have the time to go through thousands of LinkedIn profiles. So identify who the absolute core are that you need for that early stage team, and then say, okay, well, who do I know that I might be able to talk to that might suggest or recommend, or maybe think about things in a different way that's gonna help me understand what team I need.
Yeah, spot on. I think there's some really, really great points there, which also brings me on to my next question is, for you personally, how do you create your own support network? How do you make sure that you are, I guess, showing up in the right manner every day to build this business and to continue the growth of it?
Yeah, it's an important one, isn't it? Well, your own psychology, you've got to manage your own psychology. I'm a big believer personally in, certainly in the last sort of few years, I've sort of come to understand the importance of, physical activity as a means of giving yourself clarity of thought, space, and just feeling healthy and positive about the world in general. So that's one. I think you've got to read a lot. You don't necessarily have to. I'm not necessarily talking about novels, but certainly there are a lot of really valuable. There's a lot of valuable wisdom, both free and in business books and the like, the consultancies and so on. So just read, because it's going to necessarily give you massive inspiration, but it will give you comfort that exactly the same as as what you're doing here. Watching podcasts is also useful. Look at other industries also to understand what other most of the challenges that you're going to face, I face, are have been they are not new.
There's pretty much no new thing that's going to crop up. Someone's already had the problem. What I really love about the reading aspect, and I think this is kind of what you were saying, is like, I think people often read with intention. They try and read to discover something. They try and read to search something. Whereas actually, personally, anyway, I find real value in just reading because you're interested, or just reading because someone said it feels great, and that's where, for me personally anyway, I get the real nuggets of gold. I get the real sort of inspirational moments or clarity when I'm trying to read something, trying to get something from that. So I'm reading with that intention of discovering that. Often it's foggy, often it doesn't come up. Whereas actually, when I end up reading a random book that someone has sent me, I've had multiple authors on the podcast, and
Absolutely.
they send me books, and those are the books that I'm like, oh my god, actually, that's the real nugget of gold.
I, you're absolutely spot on there. I think that's absolutely right. You've got to allow yourself the space to think. You can't be reading. Reading for work is different for reading
Yeah,
outside of work, and I think that can only happen also if you allow yourself the space to. It's really the challenge with work in general, but particularly trying to run or create a company, is the space and the freedom to think. And you can only get that by self-management ultimately. I
yeah,
mean, there's lots of people. You must make friends, and you must get friends in your industry or outside, or if you've got investors, talk to them. Their networks. You must get outside advice and sort of mentorship, because that gives you coaching and gives you the strength and the resilience that you need. And you do need a lot of resilience, particularly in this current sort of global situation. But you've got to self-manage. You've got to say, okay, I won't take calls on a Friday afternoon, or I won't take calls on a Monday, or whatever it might be.
yeah. You're in
Or
control.
or I simply won't answer emails on a Sunday. We're getting to that habit of, people are emailing through the weekend. Of course, I'll look at them, but I pointedly won't respond to them, because I think it starts to take away that you start to think about something else, and about the moment of that email, as opposed to saying, actually, I need, I wanted to read this book because just because I wanted to, and it may, as you say, it may turn into something useful.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, because I completely agree with you. We seem to be moving into a world where if you get an email or you get a Slack message or a WhatsApp message from a client or colleague, in your head, and I see this a lot, people think, oh, I have to email them back straight away, or I have to reply straight away, when traditionally, if we look back at the start of email, it wasn't about that back and forth communication. It wasn't about that instant sort of gratification. It was much more about, look, this is what's going on, let me know whenever you can reply. Whereas for some reason we're moving into that instant need, and I think it's a really, really great point to give you.
It's got more pressing, isn't it, as well? Because people are working from home. It's become, actually, weirdly, it becomes very hard to split work from pleasure. Because work is necessarily more pleasant, because it probably isn't. It's probably got
there's a lot of those boundaries have been blurred, haven't they? People aren't getting on a train and then going to the office. I think people undervalue the commute aspect of work, because that commute aspect has a lot of anchor points that are triggering your mind to get into a certain framework, so that you're walking into an office and you're ready for work. Whereas a lot of people now are waking up, and if they're lucky enough to have offices like me and you, then great, they walk into their home office. But often a lot of people are working from a dining room table or the sofa, or bedroom, and you really do have to make sure that you as a founder, or actually you as anyone, if you're working from home, to create those boundaries and create that environment for not only your own success, but actually I think it comes down to your own sanity.
Absolutely, it is about that, and feeling, making yourself feel good about going to work is an important ritual. I mean, it's a bit like I forget who it was. It's famous writers, many writers actually tell you the same thing. Some will get up, and they will dress and physically go to work. I mean, in my case, my ritual in the morning is to get up and go for a long walk outside, come back, make coffee, have a shower, make a coffee, and then physically kind of mentally go to work, and just create that kind of separation between the beginning and the end of the day.
No, it is so important, and I think more and more people are realizing that, which is really key. So what's next for you guys? You mentioned there's a few different ways you can expand, there's few different ways you can grow, but if we talk in the short term, say the next 12 months, so another year from now, what are you looking to achieve in those 12 months?
Well, like many things, the biggest challenge we have is knowing what to say no to, and of course in the first year we've learned a lot about the value of that. But we're still learning. We still need to learn how to prioritize better. Over the next 12 months, we're really now, the sort of stage we're at is it's really now about deepening the level of data that we have, and understanding, of course, at the same time how we commercialize, how we monetize, how we finance that. And I suspect part of the answer to that question is, how do we think about ourselves in terms of output, publishing research. Is publishing research the way to do something which can be commercial to finance itself, but also gets us in more data. So I suspect in the sort of medium, well, in the short term, over the next quarter, we will start to move towards that model. A year out from now, once we've been through sort of various other sort of technology build processes, we would like to have either certainly kicked off, if not launched, a subscription technology product, a digital subscription product.
Yeah, but that makes perfect sense.
Towards the end of next year.
Amazing. Listen, Simon, like I said, I think what you've achieved in a year is fantastic, and I have no doubt, give you another 12 months, you guys are going to be doing something really, really special, even more so. One of my last questions is then, how can people get more information about what you do? How can people sort of start tapping into this data that you've managed to?
Absolutely. So check us out on Findexable.com. That's the sort of the company site. The actual index, the map that you can play with and zoom into and look at the companies there is at GFI, which is Global Fintech Index. .findexable.com. But if you look at findexable.com, that will also lead you there.
Amazing. Simon, thank you so much for coming on. You've provided some real insight, so I really value that.
Thanks, Stephen. Great to meet you, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone else, for listening and watching. This has been Founders 365.
Take care.